We are now recording. We have about 50 people in attendance. If you have any questions, please use the chat function down at the bottom. It's a button that's on the bottom down, on this side. And we'll do that during the Q&A section at the end of this. So Ron, take it away.
Thanks, Lauren, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our immigration workshop on applying for optional practical training. We're going to do our best to cover the most common scenarios and questions that students have when applying for OPT. What's the process look like? How long does it take? All of those fun items. And as Lauren said, if you have questions that aren't answered during the presentation, we will do our best to get to those at the end. So please send them through to the chat. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Ron Cushing. I'm Director of International Services, and I've been processing practical training applications for nearly 30 years. And so I'm going to use some of that experience here to hopefully help educate you all and help you understand what it is you're about to embark upon here. So as an international student, it's important that those who are eligible for practical training and want to apply for practical training understand how that process works. Before we get into the actual logistics of optional practical training, or what everybody calls OPT, we do need to take a second and compare it against what everybody calls curricular practical training, or CPT, because sometimes those two options get confused. There are two types of practical training. One is optional, one is curricular. Optional is anything in your field of study, and it can happen before or after graduation, that is an optional experience, provided the work is in your field of study. Curricular practical training is work that is necessary to complete your program of study, and it is used exclusively before graduation, and again, only as part of a curricular requirement. And so you got to keep that distinction very clear. Now, let's talk about curricular practical training in a little bit more detail just to start. So first, curricular practical training is to provide you with the opportunity to not only gain employment experience, but to complete something that is an integral part of your curriculum. In other words, you need to do this in order to finish your program of study. Now, that can be lots of different things. For our undergrads in engineering and DAAP, that can mean cooperative education. It can mean internships. It can mean capstones and other practical experiences. For graduate students, it can also mean those who are needing to work in order to gain necessary results for their thesis or their dissertation. So curricular practical training has a lot of different options, but the big thing is not every student gets to use curricular practical training, because not every program has that type of requirement. Now, optional practical training is an opportunity to gain work experience to complement your field of study. So, and it's available on a full-time or part-time basis. And part-time is 20 hours a week or less, and full-time is anything more than 20 hours per week. There are three types of optional practical training. One is called pre-completion OPT, which obviously occurs before you graduate while you are studying. Post-completion occurs after completion of the degree or after completion of all required coursework. And then the third type is the 24-month STEM OPT extension, which is available to students who are studying in fields designated by the Department of Homeland Security to be in science, technology, engineering, or mathematics, and provided the employer uses the EVerify system to hire all of their employees. Now, to apply for practical training, you have to understand when you are eligible or if you are eligible. Optional practical training is only for students who are on F1 status. So J1 students don't get optional practical training. H4 dependents don't get optional practical training. and you must have completed at least 1 year of full-time study before you become eligible for OPT. You can receive 12 months of OPT for each higher degree you receive. So if you get a bachelor's degree and do OPT, and then you come back and study a master's degree, you get 12 more months of OPT. If you then went on to a doctoral degree, at completion of that, you would get 12 more months of optional practical training. OPT can be used both pre and post completion, although most students save it for post completion. And the 24-month STEM extension can be obtained twice if you are receiving a higher degree. So the regular 12-month period, bachelor's, master's, doctorate, you would get 12 months for each. STEM OPT, you would only be able to get one additional STEM OPT period if you move up in degree level, so a bachelor's to a master's. If you then went from a master's to a doctorate, you would not get an additional or third STEM OPT period. Now, optional practical training is employment that is ultimately authorized by the Department of Homeland Security on what's called an employment authorization document. So it's going to have your name, your photo on it. It involves sending an application to the Department of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and it takes them on average a good 90 days or more to process the request. So the big thing you need to keep in mind is plan ahead. If you're graduating this December and you want to work starting this December or early January, you need to be applying for your OPT now. Now, you need to be aware, and the employer needs to be aware, that there's absolutely nothing you can do to speed up how long that process takes. There's a lot of misconceptions out there that if you put a job offer on the request, that it's somehow going to come back quicker, or that if you make some kind of an appeal, that it's going to come back quicker. They do not. You also need to make sure that when you engage in OPT, that you are only working in a job that is directly related to your field of study. If you work outside of those parameters, you're working in violation of your F1 immigration status. Now, how to apply for OPT? It is a two-step process because it first involves submitting a request to our office and our review, and we have to make you an I-20 form recommending the optional practical training. And then the final step is the application will ultimately get mailed by you to the Department of Homeland Security. But to start the process, you're going to go to our iBearcats Global system, and under the F1 practical training link, you will find two different links, one for the 12-month period and one for the 24-month period. Click on the one that's most appropriate for what you're applying for. You're going to be required to scan and upload to us for review all of the documents that typically need to go with the application, and we'll cover those in a moment. We will then review your request within 5 business days. Now, the important part to understand about this is our review first involves your advisor, your academic advisor, certifying that you are in fact completing your program. And so when you first apply through our system, the first place it goes is to your academic advisor. The 5-day period does not include that. And so what we recommend to all students are, when you send the application, send your advisor a little note saying, hey, be on the lookout for an email from International Services. I'm trying to apply for my practical training. We don't do what we need to do until your academic advisor approves the request. And that's when the 5-day period with us begins. We recommend and encourage very strenuously that you all watch our OPT seminar videos before you apply. We will go step by step through the application forms and tell you how each question needs to be answered. And we will comprehensively review a lot of the things that we're going to talk about in this workshop, but it will give you the complete step-by-step instructions and overview. So please watch those videos before you start to complete the 12 or 24-month OPTE forms. Now, the big key here is understanding when to apply. So essentially, you have a 5-month window to apply. Up to 90 days in advance of your program completion date, but no later than the 60th day following your completion date. You need to be aware that the card will take a good 90 days to process, and our recommendation is you apply 90 days in advance of your completion date. If you don't, first, you're not going to have it when you want it. Second, the later you wait, the more chance there is that you will lose some of your practical training time. So if, for example, you graduate this December 12th and you wait until January 1st to apply for your OPT, it will not be approved before your 60th day. And therefore, after that 60th day, any amount of time that that application remains pending is time you will lose when the final card is approved. It will be approved, but in no case will they grant OPT that goes beyond 14 months from the program completion date. So waiting can affect how much of your 12-month period you actually get. Apply early. Now, one of the big questions that we get is, what if I'm currently on curricular practical training and I'm looking to continue working permanently after the program completion date? Can I guarantee that my OPT card will come before the I-20 end date, which ends the curricular practical training? And the answer is no, you can't help that process or save that time. When we apply for your post-completion OPT and you're currently on CPT, that CPT ends on the date the I-20 program ends. And that means you better be applying 90 days in advance if you hope to have an uninterrupted employment process. And so make sure that you keep that in mind when you're applying. If you're applying for the STEM OPT extension, it must be applied for before the current OPT card expires. 1 day late, you lose your entire STEM OPT period. So you got to keep all of those things in mind on how and when to apply. Now, when you do apply, there are a core group of documents that you're going to have to fill out and some materials you're going to have to copy and send, and we will review them before you send them. There's an application form for an employment authorization document called an I-765 form, and you will have to complete that as part of the process. They have what's called a completed G-1145 form. That will get you notification that they've received your application. It's optional, but we encourage you to submit it. You're going to have to include copies of all of your previous I-20 documents. You're going to need to send us a copy of your passport page with your picture and expiration date. If your F1 visa stamp is still valid, you can send us a copy of that, although it's not required and it is optional. Your I-94 card is required, and you need to download that from the electronic I-94 card system. If you do have a job offer letter, it doesn't hurt to attach it to the request, but it is not required to apply. One of the biggest mistakes students do make is they wait until they get a job offer, then they start the OPT application process. Well, from there, it's going to take 90 plus days to get your card. Know when you're going to finish the program, and whether you have a job or not, 90 days out, you need to start applying. If you've ever been issued a previous employment authorization document, this will typically happen with students applying for the STEM OPT period. You're going to have an EAD card, and you need to send a copy of any previous card that you have. Now, there's a fee for applying for practical training, and As of today, my plan was to tell you that fee is $550 because that goes into effect after tomorrow. But early this morning, we got notification that a judge has put the fee increases. USCIS was going to increase all of their fees on hold for the moment while the case is heard. So the fee still in the foreseeable future is going to be $410, not $550 as is indicated on your screen. But you'll have to pay the fee either through check or money order, or there is a credit card authorization form, a G1450, that you can fill out. You also have to include 2 passport photos with a white background taken within the last 30 days. And lightly on the back, you need to print your name and I-94 card number. That's needed for the 12-month period and the STEM OPT application. However, the EAD card you get, as I said, it's going to take 3 months to get. This is what it's going to look like. It'll have your picture on it. But if you are applying for the STEM OPT extension, you're also going to need to include this previous card that you were issued, plus a transcript showing your degree completion. Now, practical training, that 12-month period, can be used either pre-completion or post-completion. The overwhelming number of students use it post-completion, but under pre-completion, you can use it under multiple circumstances. So it can be used full-time during annual vacations or other times when school is not in session. While school is in session, you can only use pre-completion on a part-time basis. And if studying in a master's or doctoral program, you can use it after completion of all course requirements with the exclusion of your thesis or dissertation. Now, this last point there, C, for graduate students, that's where we get a lot of confusion. So if you're done with all required coursework, you can also apply for post-completion practical training, and which one makes more sense. We always will have you apply for post-completion, because when you apply for pre-completion, you would have to apply 2 times. If you are not eligible to use the full year of pre-completion, you can only use it up to the graduation date. Then you'd have to file again for post-completion, and we want to avoid that. It costs you more money, and in most cases, the card for post-completion never arrives before the pre-completion is over. Post-completion can take place after either the degree has been completed, the last day of your last semester of study, or after all degree requirements, minus a thesis, dissertation, or capstone, have been completed. OPT on the post-completion level must be full-time, meaning at least 20 hours per week. And there is a current accommodation during the COVID-19 period that is allowing you to work less than 20 hours a week while COVID-19 is going on. You just have to be employed on some level, whether it's a couple hours a week or not. We're not sure how long that COVID-19 period is going to be in effect. It could go away tomorrow. Now, for the program completion date for our undergraduate students, that is always fixed. It is the last day of the last term of your final semester of study. There is absolutely no flexibility with that date. Program completion dates for graduate students can be much more flexible. It could be the last day of the last semester of study, or it could be the day that all required coursework is completed. Using one of those dates can be helpful in avoiding having to file 2 OPT applications. So having an earlier graduation date will only affect your ability to work on campus. So once we say you're applying for post-completion, we put an end date on your I-20. As of that end date, any on-campus work has to stop, as well as any curricular practical training time has to stop. Now, that's the summary of the application materials and some of the issues with applying and who is eligible. Next, let's turn to some of the issues that come up while you are on optional practical training. The very first question we usually get is travel while you're on practical training. First, while the card is pending, 90 days is a long time, and sometimes students want to use that period to travel home and visit family and friends. Travel home is discouraged during the application period, but it is allowable provided you're arriving back before the card is approved or your I-20 end date. After your I-20 end date is reached, the only way you're coming back is if the card gets approved, you have it in your hand, and you have a job offer. So you got to keep all of that in mind. Travel while the STEM OPT extension is pending is okay, provided you have the receipt notice that you filed the STEM extension. When you're on practical training, you have to have your I-20 signed on page 2, but unlike while you're studying, where your signature is good for 12 months, the signature when you're on OPT is only good for 6 months. So make sure you're looking at that and you understand the signature validity dates accordingly. You also have to have a valid F1 visa stamp, and there is some risk if you're traveling with an expired F1 visa stamp. All right, so one of the rules that you have to meet to get an F1 visa is I'm coming to study, and when my program is done, I'm coming home. So you have to prove you have a residence overseas, you have no intention of abandoning. When you're graduated already and working in the US, the embassy may not buy that argument that you're going to come back home quite as easily. So there is some risk with traveling on an expired F1 visa stamp if you're on OPT. By and large, most students don't have a problem doing it, but it is not a guarantee. And we have certainly had students denied visa renewals while they're on OPT. So you do have to keep that in mind. Now, while you are on OPT, you are still an F1 student. You're just not registered for classes. And there are certain things that you have to keep us up to date with and Homeland Security up to date with. So the first thing is we have to know the name and address of your employer and your personal residential address at all times. You only have 10 days to report any changes to us. So if you move, you have to report it to us. We will update the SEVIS system. If you gain a job or lose a job, you have 10 days to report that information to us so we can update the SEVIS system. Once you get on the STEM OPT extension, in additional, you have to report to us every 6 months. And so every 6 months, you have to tell us, I'm still here, I'm still employed, nothing has changed. Or if something has changed, you have to complete a new I-983 training plan. And I'll talk about that in a second. So when you apply for the STEM OPT extension, one of the things you will have to submit is this training plan that says who you are working for and what goals you hope to accomplish during your OPT period. And so if you ever change employers, a new I-983 has to be submitted for the new employer, and the old employer has to write a final evaluation for you, and you have to submit it to us so we can update the system. Now, while you are on OPT, there are maximum time periods that you are allowed to be in the country unemployed. When you're on the 12-month period, you are allowed up to 90 days of unemployment. Once you get on the STEM OPT extension, you are allowed to be unemployed for up to 150 days. And they are starting to enforce this regulation. This was not something that they openly tried to enforce before, but now they are terminating SEVIS records for people who are unemployed for those periods of time. So the responsibility is on you to make sure that you keep us up to date with that information. If you get your OPT card approved and 2 months later you still haven't found a job and then you finally find it, but you don't tell us, the government thinks you're still unemployed. And so make sure that you update us accordingly with your jobs while you're on OPT. So once you have reached that 90 or 150-day limit of unemployment, you are not supposed to be in the US any longer. So you can depart. You can, before you reach those thresholds, apply for new I-20s to start a new program of study. But day 91 or day 151, if you're still in the country unemployed, you are in violation of your status, and you want to make sure that you don't do that. Now, OPT is an employment period, but not everybody gets paid for their OPT activities. While you are on the 12-month period of OPT, you are allowed to volunteer or work in a non-paid capacity. You are not allowed to volunteer or work in non-paid capacities when you're on the 24-month STEM OPT extension period. But volunteer positions would get reported just like a paid job would. You'd have to tell us the name and address of the employer when you finish those activities. So you need to keep all of that stuff in mind when you're on the OPT period. Now, while you're on OPT, you absolutely can work for multiple employers. On the 12-month period, it can be any amount of time, 2 hours, 5 hours for different employers. But if you are on the STEM OPT extension first, every employer has to be an EVerify employer. You're not allowed to work for one EVerify employer and then a non-EVerify employer. And every job must be at least for 20 hours a week or more if you're going to engage in employment with them on the STEM OPT extension. So you need to keep those distinctions in mind. Some further things for those on the STEM OPT extension that are important. First, you've got to be on the 12-month post-completion period to apply for the STEM OPT extension. And your degree must be in a designated STEM field. If you're not sure if your program is a STEM field, you can certainly ask us, and we'll be more than happy to tell you. And the employer must be an EVerify employer, and the government does keep a list of those employers. So the EVerify system is maintained by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services and the Social Security Administration, and it is a large database that supposedly tracks and monitors who is in the country and eligible to work. Not every employer uses EVerify. In fact, the overwhelming majority of employers don't use EVerify. So if you are in a field that is a STEM field, knowing which employers are EVerify is certainly going to be important for you, because you're going to want to seek out those employers so you can get that extra 24-month STEM OPT extension period. The STEM fields are pretty logically thought out if you think about it. It's obviously going to be anything in sciences, engineering, mathematics, and technologies, and they have large wide sweeping categories. Anything in engineering, anything that's computer related, mathematics related, most of the health services fields, all of those things, physical sciences like chemistry and physics. But again, it'll be listed on your I-20, and if you're not sure if it is a STEM field, you can certainly ask us and we will tell you. When you are applying for the STEM OPT extension, one of the big things that you and your employer are going to need to understand is the I-983 training plan. So the first thing is, to apply for the STEM extension, you and your employer have to fill out the I-983, and it has to be filed with our office in order to apply. And a new training plan must be submitted to us within 10 days anytime the training plan initially listed changes or you change employers. It requires a filing of a new I-983 form. Now, so when you're submitting a formal employer-signed self-evaluation, you have to first, every 6 months, report to us that you're still employed, but then at the 12-month mark and then at the 24-month mark, you have to submit annual evaluations. And those are done on the I-983 form itself. There are sections for the 12-month evaluation, and there's a section for the final evaluation. What you need to do as a student when you fill out your first I-983 is you need to keep that form in its entirety, because you are going to reuse it down the road when you do your 12-month and 24-month extensions. When you file those, Homeland Security just doesn't want that page with the evaluation. They want the entire 983 form. So make sure you keep it for yourself for future use. But most importantly, make sure you file it timely. So if you get OPT that gets approved January 1st, 2021, your first annual evaluation is due January 1st, 2022, and you only have a 10-day window to file it. That means no later than January 10th, 2022, that first 12-month evaluation period, I-983 has to be filed with us. And then the same with the final evaluation. You have a 10-day window from the date your STEM OPT extension ends to get that final evaluation to us. Make sure that you do this. We have students who are getting requests for evidence when they're applying for H-1Bs, asking for proof that they submitted the I-983 training plan and the final evaluation timely. Make sure that you're on top of this and that you follow through with it. The form itself is a pretty easy form to fill out. They want to know the name of the employer, obviously your name, the address. They're going to ask for things like their EVerify number. You're going to have to sign the form. And then there are sections that the employer has to sign the form. So you got to keep all of that in mind when you're on the STEM OPT extension. All employment, when you're on 12-month OPT or the STEM extension, has to be in your field of study and appropriate to your degree level. And when you're on the STEM extension, you've got to be employed for at least 20 hours a week. You also can't be working for temp agencies or consulting firms. There must be a bona fide employer-employee relationship to get the STEM extension. When you're on the 12-month OPT period, you can actually be your own boss if you're consulting or doing something like that. But when you want to apply for the STEM extension, you cannot be your own boss. You have to be employed by somebody who's training and evaluating you. You can't complete your own I-983. So, and again, you cannot volunteer when you're on the STEM OPT extension. You have to be employed. Now, the most common transition for a student from F1 OPT to another employment visa is transition to an H-1B specialty worker visa. The problem is the government limits how many of those that they give out every year. The government's fiscal year starts October 1, and they only give out 85,000 H-1Bs each year, 65,000 for all degree levels, an additional 20,000 for master and doctoral level students. Employers who wish to get one of those slots have to apply for a lottery. And if they get selected in the lottery for your job, they can then file the H-1B petition on your behalf. And if they do that, you would then be eligible to get what is called the H-1B cap extension if your OPT ends anytime between April 1st and September 30th of that year. So the H-1B would start on October 1. If you have a pending or approved H-1B petition, you can get from us an I-20 with the cap gap authorization that will carry your work up until 10/1. So that's something that you need to keep in mind and understand while you're on that period as well. Now, once your practical training period is up, you're authorized to work only till the end date on that card, but that's when your 60-day grace period starts. And during that 60-day grace period, you can depart the U.S., you can apply for a new I-20 to begin a new program of study, or you can change your status to something other than F1. But you have to do one of those things during the 60-day grace period. So make sure you keep that in mind. If your plan is to start a new program of study, you have to get that I-20 within that 60-day grace period, and then classes must start within 5 months of the end date of your OPT period. So you've got to keep all of this in mind while you're on OPT. So getting OPT is something that everyone is entitled to do, provided you don't use 365 days of curricular practical training during your study. If you are eligible, the process to get it is time-consuming, takes at least 90 days, and make sure you start the process in advance. And once approved, you have lots of legal responsibilities that you have to comply with. Make sure you understand them all and that you comply with them. So that is the formal presentation on the application process and the rules, and some of the things you need to keep in mind. At this moment, we are now going to open it up for questions, and I'm going to ask Lauren to jump back in. She's been monitoring the chat, and she's going to lead me through what the common questions are, and I will do my best to answer them. So Lauren, what are we looking at?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that presentation, Ron. I think we touched on a lot of stuff. We're going to be kind of answering very general questions here. So if you have things that are very, very specific to your case and your situation, what I'm going to do right now is in the chat function, I'm going to put information. So there were a couple of links we saw during the presentation, the STEM EVerify and things like that. But if you have very specific questions and you'd like one of our advisors to take a look at your very specific case, I'm going to give you some information. So in the chat function, I've just put up there the EVerify, the OPT information link on our website, our phone number, our email address, and then the Ask an Advisor session. So we have a session tomorrow where you can pop in and ask, more specific questions for your cases. So that being said, we're going to jump in. We wanted a clarification on some of the STEM majors. Would nursing and information technology be considered STEM fields, Ron?
Nursing is not. Information technology is.
Great. And then we wanted more of a clarification on the graduation date with the OPT. So the question was, can we select a start date within 60-day period after graduation date? So if my start date is the 59th day after graduation, can I still apply for OPT 89 days before graduation or 184 days before the start date?
So first thing is the start date can be anywhere within that 60-day period following graduation. Day 59 is fine. You pick the day. You are allowed to apply up to 90 days in advance of the program completion date. So if you're graduating December 12th, you can apply 90 days before December 12th. And if your start date is going to be after December 12th, that is fine.
Fantastic. And then like a marketing graduate is not a STEM
marketing is not a STEM.
There we go. And so what happens if we had a question about the EAD, and I'm pulling that up right now. Give me 1 second. So what happens if you do not get your EAD approved by the max time window of 3 months? Can you file any kind of petition for that?
No. So the bottom line is you're at their mercy once you file it. And there's no requirement that they absolutely approve the case within 90 days. Sometimes they approve them a little bit faster than 90 days. By and large, most of them take 90 to 110 days to process, and they will only by law let you apply 90 days in advance. If it's not approved by day 90, there's not a lot you can do. If it starts to get egregious, and egregious would be at least 120 days, you can start making inquiries, but there's no backdoor way to get them to approve your case because it's taking longer. We've had some students wait 4 or 5 months for their OPT cards, and there's no rhyme or reason to why or how that happens. It just know that it does happen sometimes, and you do need to be prepared for that. By and large, 95% of all students get their cards within 120 days. Everybody wants to know exactly when it's going to come, and there's no way to predict that. The average right now is 90 to 110 days.
Fantastic, thank you. How does reduced course load affect OPT? Can you remain on reduced course load and apply for OPT?
Well, when you're on reduced course load, that indicates, number one, you're done with all required coursework. And at that point, the decision is going to be, are you going to apply for pre-completion OPT or post-completion OPT? And in almost all cases, we mandate that you apply for post-completion. Applying for pre-completion until your graduation date for part of it, and then post-completion for the remainder of it. That means 2 applications. That means a delay in getting the cards. They never match up. There's always delays. And so we are going to push you towards applying for post-completion practical training at the point that you're done with all required coursework. The only time we want somebody applying for pre-completion practical training is when you are actually going to be doing it part-time while you're enrolled full-time or during a scheduled summer break. If you're a graduate student done with all required coursework, post-completion OPT is what you need to be applying for.
Perfect. And thank you for letting me know one of the links in the that I posted for the EVerify is not working. We'll get that to you guys, or we'll put it in the newsletter for future recommendations. So as I'm kind of going through your questions here, I can't get the right link for you. So my apologies on not being able to be timely on that in the chat function. The next question would be PhD candidates in OPT. Any additional things that they need to know? Can they get the 1 year? Can they ask for the extension? Is there anything specific if you're on a PhD that you have to worry about with OPT?
Nope. It doesn't matter if you're on bachelor's, master's, doctorate. What I covered applies to you regardless. Now, bachelor students, you're not going to have a period where you're done with all required coursework like a graduate student is. And certainly doctoral students spend longer time periods in that status academically and do a lot of applying, before they get that actual degree, but after the coursework is done. And again, in those cases, we have you apply for post-completion, not pre-completion.
Fantastic. We did have a couple of questions about CPT. Should those students just email us about CPT questions?
Well, you can. It might be related to the OPT, so go ahead and read them.
Okay, let me pull those up. We were asked, let's see, F1 master's student in my CPT. I have part-time CPT until November 2nd. Can I utilize the 11th month CPT to work for my current employer? Can I apply for CPT? And a different question was, can I apply for CPT after my defense?
Well, if you've defended, you have no reason to be on CPT. Again, CPT is for you to complete a degree requirement. If you're a graduate student, that requirement is getting to your defense. And once you're on defense, you have no reason to be on CPT. It would be OPT post-completion.
Fantastic. And And again, there's nothing that an applicant or university can do when the OPT application is pending with USCIS for 90 days.
Absolutely nothing. We are at their mercy.
Fantastic. Well, not fantastic, but thank you for
No,
that.
it is not. It's not a good thing.
No. We do have a question about the DHS fixed time period and extension of stay procedure for non-immigrant academic students. How's that going to affect OPT?
Well, if it goes through, so that person is referring to a proposed rule that was published last Friday by Homeland Security that's going to essentially, if approved, and let me first stress, if it's approved, it's a proposed rule that's going through a comment period. That's far from a done deal. And when it gets approved, who knows? It could be 90 days, could be 120 days, could be never. A lot depends. But if it does get approved, what it's doing is it's taking away what is called duration of status. So right now, you get admitted with an I-20 with no end date when you enter the country. You're put on what's called DS, or duration of status. This new rule is going to take that away and give everybody a maximum of 4 years. And in some cases, they may only get 2 years. And so while you're studying, when that end date is coming up, it means in addition to whatever else you're doing, applying for OPT, you would have to also apply for an extension of stay that would get reviewed and approved by Homeland Security. And so it won't affect the OPT itself in that process, but it's an extra application that you would have to fill out once you've reached that 2 or 4 year time period. And that includes when you want or need practical training. And so it's not a rule that we're happy about. We didn't like to see what was proposed. We are going to certainly be fighting it with everything we have and trying to get it overturned. And but the good news is, for those of you currently in the country, it won't immediately apply to you. You're going to be given a 4-year window where you might transition to that. And so anybody listening to this right now who's getting ready to apply for OPT, this new proposed rule, even if it goes into effect soon, would likely not have any impact on what you have to do, including your OPT.
Thank you. That's very clear and very good to know. We have some questions about H-1B, and we got a thank you shout out from the students there too. We've got some questions about H-1B visas, and can they apply through their employer during the first year of OPT without an extension? And additionally, kind of on that question as well. Well, let me find that question. Can you answer that question first?
Yes. So let's say you are a STEM OPT student and you're going to be working for what you hope will be 36 months total on OPT. Your employer can and should start the H-1B lottery process during year 1 because it's a lottery, and you may not get selected year 1, and you may not get selected year 2, you may not get selected year 3, but the more times you try, the more chance you have of succeeding in getting one of those H-1B slots. And so if you have an employer who wants to sponsor you on H-1B status, even if you have 2 years of OPT left, they should be applying for that lottery to hopefully get you that slot.
Perfect. And if you are not on OPT, do you recommend that, for example, students who graduate in December, do you advise them to file for H-1B in the following like for April, for a smoother transition?
Well, again, the key is first, do you have an employer who wants to get you an H-1B? And they should always attempt to get you into the lottery, regardless of how many years of OPT you might do. Some students don't get OPT at all, and the only way you're going to get hired is if you get selected in the lottery. A lot does also depend on the type of employer. So if you're going to work at an educational institution, like UC, we don't have to worry about the H-1B cap because we get to hire anybody whenever we want. We're exempt from the cap. And that is true of educational institutions and non-governmental nonprofit research organizations. And so, to make sure that you know who's hiring you and if they're subject to the H-1B cap or not. And the employer should be getting you on that list for the lottery when they know they want to hire you.
Fantastic. And we're getting a couple of questions. The OPT application, is it done through the iPairCats global portal? What does that portal take care of for a student when they start to use that they don't have to kind of worry about reaching out to an advisor for?
So the point of the portal is this. First, you need an I-20 to apply for your OPT, and it facilitates with us that option. So you're telling us you're getting ready to graduate, you want to do OPT. We have to review it, make sure you are getting ready to graduate, make sure you are eligible. Not everybody's eligible. If you used, 365 days of curricular practical training, you're not eligible. If you weren't F1 for one full year, you're not, or if you weren't a full-time student for one full year and F1 at the time, you're not eligible. So it first and foremost gets us to evaluate whether or not you're eligible for it so we can make the I-20 that's required. The next thing it does is it gives you the buffer of we're going to review your application to make sure it's right. If you file something wrong, and it can be as simple as checking a wrong box, you could lose your entire OPT period. And so we are making sure that the I-765 is completed correctly. You're submitting all the required documents necessary so that when it does get shipped off for review and approval by Homeland Security, that it gets reviewed and approved.
Perfect. And we've had a couple of questions about changes, like can you change an employer during OPT, or can you change your start date after applying for OPT? What do changes look like in that application process?
Changes depends on what you're applying for. So obviously, anytime you change employers, that requires updating with us. And you can certainly change employers provided the job is related to your field of study. But one thing that can't happen is once you apply, you're locked in. We can't change that start date, after the fact. You're locked into that start date. You're locked into that employer, at least until it's approved. Once it's approved, then we can do things like change employers. But you've got to be very sure what you want your start date to be, apply for it, and then once it's applied for, you're going to live with whatever start date you asked. So a very common scenario we get is, I don't have a job offer now. I'm going to apply for my OPT to start day 58 after I graduate. A month later, whoops, now I have a job. Can I change my start date to an earlier time? The employer wants me to start earlier. That can't happen. The system doesn't work like that. You're locked in to that start date once the application is submitted.
Fantastic. And can you apply for post-OPT and the STEM extension at the same time?
No, you cannot. You have to be on OPT the first 12-month period first, and then you can apply 90 days in advance of that expiring for the STEM OPT extension. You have to apply for them separately.
Great. We do have a lot of questions. Some things, again, are a little bit more specific. So if you have a very specific question to your case, we'll ask you to email us. You can have your record open and look at the things with you right there. So don't hesitate to email or call us at all. Someone is asking that USCIS did release a new I-765 form in October. And do we need to sign this form by pen and not electronically?
So the new form is going to be required. They They should have their most recent version of it up. Now, there was going to be a new form that goes into effect on Friday with the new fee, and the federal judge delaying that will put a hold on that. But whatever the most recently posted I-765 is on the USCIS website, and we will have that linked on our e-form, is the form that you should be filling out, and you should be signing the form in ink.
Fantastic. And we're coming up on the last 3 minutes here, and I want to be really conscious of time for everybody who's attending today. We did set this at an hour. Ron, last parting words, how can students feel really secure and safe that they're doing this OPT process right? Like, what are, just some things that they need to know holistically in just a couple of sound bites?
The most critical thing you need to do is be aware of the time. And if you're going to graduate December 12th and you want OPT, you should be applying for the OPT now, period. The earlier you apply, the better. It's better to apply early than late, because again, if you wait, many employers don't like to wait. So, if you wait until you get a job offer and then apply, and the employer says, well, we need you to start in 3 weeks, it's just not going to happen. So, know when you're going to finish and apply timely. That is the most important thing.
Fantastic. Well, we are right at 2:30. And so, we have all of your questions that you've submitted early, that you've submitted throughout here. I will keep record of these questions so that we make sure that we continuously improve our processes and our presentations to make sure that, we can always give the best information in a concise and short manner. We have recorded this, and so what we will do is we will post this in our weekly newsletter. That's that newsletter that all international students get once a week. We'll make sure that link goes out there as soon as this presentation is rendered and is ready to link out. I will also include the links that we discussed today from the presentation in that newsletter as well. If you have any questions or concerns, by all means, email us, send us any questions, concerns. We have like I said earlier, an advisor answer series that runs every Tuesday and Thursday. And literally it is a space like this where you come in, you have one-on-one time and attention from our advisors here in the office, and they can answer your questions right there for you. So I am going to once again put the, because we've had a lot of questions, I've just posted the OPT information, where to find that on our website if you have some follow-up questions after this, our international UCI office contact information, and links to those advisor answer series so you can get that one-on-one attention from our advisors. But they're always an email away, a phone call away. We always have somebody ready to answer any of your questions or calls, right, Ron?
That is absolutely correct.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Ron. I really appreciate it. I'm going to end the recording now, and we